So right out of the gate, I feel like I need to start this review off with a retraction, correction, apology. I don't know. I don't know what term I really want to use here. But at the end of the last review, when kind of doing the bumper for the lead into this one, I had said that I felt like this was the worst Abbott and Costello movie. And upon reflection, and after having rewatched the film for this review, I don't believe that to be the case anymore. And as I've said multiple times over the course of this series, one of the great things about doing this is getting able to go back and re-examine these films and look at them under a different light, look at them from a different perspective than I ever did before. And I feel like even the films that I was not the biggest fan of then, and maybe I'm not the biggest fan of now, I feel like I have appreciated a lot more of them and enjoy them a lot more than I thought I was going to. And that's, again, it's one of the great things about doing this series, is getting able to go back and revisit these films. So I feel like that statement that this was the worst Abbott and Costello movie was a statement made based on my opinion of the film at that time. And that opinion has changed. I do not believe that this is the worst Abbott and Costello movie. I'm afraid Coming Round the Mountain is going to hold that title for the rest of time for me. But it does not change the fact that I feel this is definitely one of their weaker films. It is on the weak side. And it's weak in bizarre ways and really baffling ways. Ways that I feel could have been avoided had different choices been made. What I feel are obvious choices, but everything's obvious from 80 years in the future or whatever. So, while I do not feel any longer like this is the worst Abbott and Costello film, please do not misunderstand. It's still not one of their betters, and it is definitely the worst of the Meet the Monster series, by far. And I believe that the straying from the established formula of those films, particularly of Meet Frankenstein, is part of the reason this one is still on the weaker side. So now that I've laid that on you, let's actually get into it and talk about this movie, because there's a lot to get into with this. So usually I start out these reviews by going, okay, what's the story for this one? And right away, and I want to start off with the good things and then talk about the bad things, but right out the gate with that format, I'm kind of kneecapping myself and painting myself into a corner, because part of the problem with this film is the story is so bloody confusing. I cannot fully explain to you what is going on in this movie. So the best I can figure out is, so Abbott and Costello are basically playing Abbott and Costello. What's really funny about this movie, IMDb for this movie lists their names, their character names, as like Pete and Tubby or something like that. I forget. But they call themselves Abbott and Costello and Bud and Lou. They're basically playing. It is literally Abbott and Costello meet the Mummy. Like, they don't even have the fake names, and they don't even have like the vaguely fake names like Louis Francis and Bud Alexander, where they're using their middle names as their last names. No, they're just Abbott and Costello. They have just dropped all pretense at this stage. Anywho, so there are two Americans trapped over in Egypt who get involved through shenanigans with warring factions who are fighting over a treasure that some archaeologist has uncovered, and along with the treasure he found a mummy of an old pharaoh. This group of criminals led by Mary Winsler are after the treasure, whereas this cult of mummy worshippers are after the actual mummy, and everybody's kind of coming at each other, and Abbott and Costello end up with this medallion, which is our MacGuffin for the film, and everybody's after them for this, and it's impossible to tell kind of what everyone's end goal is, what their motivation is, what they're trying to achieve, whose side anyone's on, who's the good guy, who's the bad guy. And yeah, it's all over the place. You know, I'm going to compare this movie a lot to Meets Frankenstein, and I'm sorry to do that because, again, you try to judge films on their own merit. But when this is clearly going off the success of those Meet the Monsters films, and you stray so far from some of the basic tenets that made those films successful, I think it needs to be brought up. So compare this now to the storyline of Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. Dracula wants to put Lou's brain in the Frankenstein monster to make it controllable. Boom, done. You know, it was, and everything, and the, you know, any complications about, you know, the multiple girls and all of that, that's just icing. Even, you know, take the plot of Meet the Invisible Man. You know, Bud and Lou are detectives trying to clear the Invisible Man of murder. Boom, done. You know, Abbott and Costello are London bobbies trying to solve the mystery of the monster who's killing everybody. Boom, done. Whereas Meet the Mummy, the plot and the various players in it are so convoluted, it's impossible to enjoy anything. It's like, what the hell is happening? So I'm sorry I'm starting off on a negative. I usually like to start off on the positives. And especially after I've already badmouthed the movie and called it like the worst one, I think I need to start off on the positives to kind of illustrate where my, you know, kind of change of tune is coming from. And where that change of tune comes from is from Abbott and Costello themselves. Bud and Lou are on point in this film. They are really working it. And when you consider that this is towards the end of their careers, and of course nobody knows it's the end of your career, that the end of your career is coming until it does, really. Considering though they're older now, they've been doing this for a long time, they don't really have to try as hard as they're trying in this movie. They can sit back and just take the paycheck and just, you know, cash it. We've seen a couple of those films. Again, Coming Around the Mountain kind of springs to mind. But this one, it feels like they're really giving it their all. Like they're not doing a lot of the older routines. They are pulling out some familiar ones, but they're also doing some new stuff. They do a bit in this, which they had done on the Colgate Comedy Hour, and I'm not sure which film or which one came first, if they did it there first or if they did it for this movie first. But it's a similar bit where they wind up in possession of a stolen necklace, and they're trying to get rid of it and trying to plant it on the other person. And so they hide it in a hamburger and are constantly flopping it between them, and eventually it ends up with Lou, and he ends up eating it. It's a really good routine, kind of building off some of their older stuff, but it's fresh. And they're really doing a great job. It's not as good as the live version they did for the Colgate Comedy Hour, but it's still pretty funny. And their basic interactions are still really good. You know, they do the thing where the femme fatale tries to con Lou out of something, and, you know, it's not as good as it is in previous movies, but it's still pretty funny. They revisit the bit that they did in Here Come the Coeds, where Lou swallows Lon Chaney Jr.'s dice, and they're shaking him up and looking at it in an x-ray and gambling off it. They kind of do the same thing here, where the bad guys are trying to get the inscription off the medallion after he eats it, so they're shaking him up and putting it in the x-ray. Still pretty good, even though it's clear Lou's not as buoyant as he once was. So Bud and Lou are coming to play, and their stuff is still really good. The problem is everything else is so weak. As I said, the script itself is overly convoluted. What really damns this movie, and again, going back with the comparison to Meet Frankenstein, is that this movie is not even trying to pretend to be scary. We talked about this at length, so I'm revisiting old ground, but let's reiterate just for the folks at home. one of the things that made Meet Frankenstein such a success was that they treated it like a horror movie that Abbott and Costello just happened to be in. Everything else about it was shot and filmed and lit and designed to look like a horror movie. Atmosphere was a big part of that film's success. It was a big part of what made that the classic that it is. And we see that the Meet the Monster films have kind of slid down that path as they have gone on. The Meet the Invisible Man had a lot of atmosphere. Meet Jekyll and Hyde had less atmosphere. And now this one has next to none. This one unfortunately looks like an early Abbott and Costello movie. The sets are big, but they're goofy looking. The costuming is atrocious. The leader of the mummy worshiping cult wears this outfit. I swear I've seen more realistic costumes in the B movie serials that they would do. The mummy looks, the fucking state of him. You know, I'm stealing a line from OSW reviews. The fucking state of him looks atrocious. Looks just awful. Oh, I can't even describe it. And that's true of just about every other thing in this film. This film has no atmosphere. It's not even trying to be scary. And the Mummy is played for laughs. Frankenstein, the Invisible Man, Dracula, the Wolfman, even Jekyll and Hyde, even though that was on the weaker end of the scale, none of those monsters were played for laughs. They were played as serious, 100% threats. The Mummy is not. The Mummy is played as a goofball, and as such, it gives Lou nothing to play off of. It gives us, as an audience, nothing to laugh at. You know, again, I talked about the sets. They look cheap. There's a bit here where Lou is running around the pyramid, and it looks like a fucking haunted house. It looks like the haunted house from Keep 'Em Flying, is what it looks like. It's atrocious. And I understand that at this stage, you know, Bud and Lou are still big names, and they're still decent box office. I get that they're not at the heights they were. I get that, so you're not spending as much. But you gotta throw something at this. It felt like they wanted this to be big, but just, I don't know, just the direction and the production of it, it doesn't hold up. It doesn't hold up. Yeah, like they tried, but it just doesn't work. The film, yeah. In terms of cast, supporting cast, we're back to our kind of usual crop of, you know, journeymen and also-rans. A couple of notable names in this one. Marie Windsor, who I mentioned earlier, kind of, again, a B-movie actor, but I bring her up just because as a fan of Mystery Science Theater 3000, for anybody who remembers the Roger Corman film on that, Swamp Diamonds is Josie, one of the escaped women convicts. So that's a fun little bit of trivia. More interesting, though, is Michael Anorsa. I'm saying his name wrong, and I'm deeply apologizing. But Michael Anorsa, who geeks and folks of geek culture will recognize, one as one of the original Klingons who played Kang. Not only played Kang in the original series, but came back for the highly regarded episode Blood Oath of Deep Space Nine, and also the flashback episode of Star Trek Voyager. So one of the original Klingons is in this movie. More famously, and I love bringing this up, Michael Nasser is also the iconic voice of the definitive version of Mr. Freeze from Batman the Animated Series. So one of the greats of nerd culture is in this Abbott and Costello film. When I found that, I was like, oh my freaking God, that's awesome! So that was pretty cool. You can't really tell. He doesn't talk much, and he doesn't do his iconic voice really. So you can't really connect him to all those other parts. But it's cool that he's there. So yeah, so that's kind of the deal with this one. I don't know quite what else to say about this movie. I know that the last time I saw this film before doing it for this review was on Turner Classic, and it was a series they had done a couple years ago. This is, I think, like 5-6 years ago. I can't even remember when this was. But they were doing a series where they were showing movies that had negative cultural stereotypes in it. Like doing a whole series of them for different cultures, and they would have a learned representative of said culture come in and kind of point out the flaws that Hollywood had made in depicting their culture in those early days. You know, they had a Japanese professor, they had a Latino poet, I believe, and they had for this one an Egyptian doctor. They had shown this film and Casablanca and a couple of other ones basically showing the negative way in which the Egyptian culture was represented. And I remember feeling just so angry about that. Not at the point of that series. I completely understand and support the goals of that series, kind of go back and look at some of these portrayals of these different cultures and going, hey, that's really offensive and really, crazy that people did that back then. But what made me mad was the fact that, and as I mentioned this way back at the introduction to these videos, that, I always felt like Turner Classic gave no respect to Bud and Lou. Absolutely none at that stage of time. They would show Buck Privates for 31 Days of Oscar, and that was it. That was the only time you saw an Abbott and Costello movie. They didn't show any of the horror movies at Halloween, didn't show any of the service pictures on Memorial Day or anything else, didn't show, they had never been the star of the month at that point. But the only time they're going to show an Abbott and Costello movie is to show one of their weaker ones and basically to rip it apart and say how much it sucks. And that really pissed me off. I hope if there's one thing I have illustrated well over the course of this year-and-a-half long odyssey of doing this show, is that Abbott and Costello were vital to Hollywood. They were Hollywood at one time. These were not flash-in-the-pan comedians. These were guys with huge legacies. And the fact that they never got that respect from Turner Classic, that the place that supposedly their mission statement was to preserve Hollywood history, pissed me off. So that's neither here nor there. That has nothing to do with this review. That's just something I wanted to voice. Now, obviously, since then, Turner Classic has done a better job. Abbott and Costello were the star of the month a year or so ago, finally. They've had whole days of Abbott and Costello films before. So they've gotten a bit more respect. But to me, it was kind of a punch in the face to these two guys. So again, that has nothing to do with the review. Nothing to do with the review. Just a personal gripe that I kind of wanted to bring up as it relates to this film. This film has a rather dubious place in history, or I don't think dubious is the right word. It has an important place in history because, and again, nobody really knew it at the time, but this is truly the end of an era. This is the last film that Bud and Lou made at Universal. And when you consider how many of their movies were Universal films and how much of their career was wrapped up with Universal Pictures, that's a huge statement. That's massive. That's like Bret Hart wrestling his last match for WWE back in '97 in the Montreal Screwjob. Though it wasn't quite that nasty. Universal well, their contract was up, and they were in negotiations, and long story short, they didn't, Universal was not really willing to pay them what they felt they were worth, and I think also they were kind of, the filming schedule, which they've been doing for so long, had, they were older now, and for all the work they were doing, I think they wanted less, a little easier schedule and more money, which is not a huge or I think inappropriate request for these two guys, but they couldn't come to terms, and as such, Bud and Lou decided not to return to Universal, which is a kind of a big thing. They had other projects lined up that they wanted to do as well. There was talk of them doing a Saturday morning game show for kids, which I'm very sorry that never happened. I would have loved to have seen that. They also, I think, their plan was to basically do their self-promoted films, their self-produced films, which had proven, Africa Screams, Jack and the Beanstalk, these had proven to be reliable moneymakers, and they had planned on, one of the plans I read was that they were planning to kind of do films that were shot in other countries. Like, they wanted to go and do tours. They were very big in England, and they wanted to go do another tour of England and basically film a movie actually in England. They had done movies that took place in England before, but never actually once filmed there. So they wanted to go and do different things. So the future seemed bright, but that's not quite what happened. And we're coming to it now. And I gotta, boy, this is hard. This is really hard to say, because it's you know it's always coming. It's kind of like your first day at high school, when you start freshman year. You know what the end goal is. You know where this is going, and it's going to take you a little while to get there, but you know what's coming, and you're working towards that goal. And finally that you arrive there, and even though you knew it was coming, it's still a very bittersweet moment. And that's what I'm feeling right now as I'm kind of getting to the bumper here, is that we are at the end, my friends. This over a 1.5 year long journey, and it may be more than that depending on when I actually have a time to watch the movie and review it, but we are at the end. This was the penultimate Abbott and Costello film, and we have only one Bud Abbott and Lou Costello movie left. Only one. What a long, wonderful trip it has been, and as Q says, all good things must come to an end. And when next we meet, whenever that is, we will talk about the final bow of Abbott and Costello in the movies. So I invite you to join me. I thank you for joining me for this long and strange trip. And I invite you to join me one last time. Come dance with me, dance with Bud Abbott, dance with Lou Costello, and dance with me, Henry. So thank you very much for joining me, and we'll see you next time. And as always, drive safe, and I will see you at the movies.